Nora?
Welcome, comadres and friends. My name is Nora de Hoyos Comstock, and the leadership team of the Comadres and Friends Book Club and I are pleased to have you join us for tonight's teleconference as we celebrate our book club quinceañera, 15 years. It's been our privilege to support Latino authors throughout these many years, and we're looking forward to the next 15. We hope you'll be a part of them as well. Would also like to extend a warm welcome to readers following us on our live Twitter chat. Tonight, please help us welcome authors Reyna Grande and Cleyvis Natera. Their interviews will begin shortly. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping notes. Please keep yourselves on mute. You can keep your videos on as long as you're not distracting to us. And we suggest you put yourself on speaker mode, which makes the speaker big, but you're welcome to use gallery, it works just as well. And if you have any questions or comments, please put them in the chat and we'll try to get to them. But first, let's start with our book club's history. We love telling you our history. Comadre Tess?
Bienvenido a todos. I'm Tess Tobin, submissions coordinator. Our first book club gathering was in July 2004 in New York in Comadre Maria Ferrer's apartment. After a hiatus, Nora Comstock re-envisioned and relaunched the book club nationwide to promote the work of Latino authors to every book lover, to bring our community to bookstores, and to support our writers. We started these teleconferences in October 2006. We are in our 15th year of sharing works by Latino authors with all of you. We created the teleconferences and book club to entice everyone to read more Latino authors, to learn about Latino roots and the different perspectives on Latino culture and heritage. Our book club and teleconferences are open to all, not just Latinos. We are creating a space for everyone to explore the Latino writer's mind and soul as portrayed through the written word. We encourage you to join our local book club in your city or time zone. We have clubs in 12 cities that are meeting virtually. There is sure to be one that can fit your schedule. If your city doesn't have one, why not help us start one? For information about our book club, visit our website at latinolit.com. So please invite others to join us. Comadre Maria.
Good evening. Welcome, comadres and friends, to our June 2022 Zoom teleconference. My name is Maria Ferrer. I am the program manager for the Las Comadres and Friends Book Club. Thank you for joining us tonight. We begin with author Reyna Grande, an award-winning author, motivational speaker, and writing teacher. As a young girl, she crossed the US-Mexico border to join her family in Los Angeles. A harrowing journey chronicled in The Distance Between Us, a National Book Critics Circle Award finalist. Since then, Reyna has written several books, including the one we are featuring tonight, A Ballad of Love and Glory. Interviewing Reyna is women's fiction writer Julia Amante, the author of Evenings at the Argentine Club and Say You'll Be Mine. Julia writes emotionally rich stories about family, love, and the passion of chasing and achieving one's goals. Julia also writes Latina fiction under the pseudonym Lara Rios. Comadre Julia, take it away.
So hello, Reyna. It's really good to see you. I haven't seen you in a long time. So before we start, for those who haven't had the opportunity to read your book yet, could you give us just a brief synopsis of what the book is about?
Yeah, so the novel is a war story, an immigrant story, and a love story in one. It's a war story in that it takes place during the Mexican-American War, or as it is called in Mexico, the US invasion, which is what it really, what it was. It was an invasion. This novel captures that period of 2 years from 1846 to 1848 when the US invaded Mexico and ended up taking half of Mexico's territory. It's an immigrant story in that my male protagonist is a real historical figure. His name is John Riley, and he was an immigrant from Ireland, from County Galway. And like most Irish immigrants at the time were escaping extreme poverty in Ireland as well as famine. And he joined the US Army to try to find a better life for his family. But he ended up deserting the US Army, and he switched sides to fight for Mexico and help Mexico defend itself against the US invaders. And so the story captures John Riley's experience as an immigrant. And at the time, as you know, in the 19th century, the Irish were demonized and reviled in the same way that Latino immigrants are today. The ballad is also a love story between John Riley and Jimena, who is a Mexican healer whose husband gets killed by the Texas Rangers right at the beginning of the story, and she ends up becoming a combat nurse in the Mexican army, and that's how she and John Riley meet, and they fall in love. But it's a love that has many, complications and obstacles. And through the story, John and Jimena help each other survive the brutality of the invasion.
All right, very good. So actually that leads me to the second question. This book is about war and about glory, right? As the title says. How do you write about war with all the different battles and the gore and the brutality? And did that take an emotional toll on you? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. And I think, the war part is what surprises my readers, because the novel is a total departure from anything that I've written before. And so if you've read my memoirs or my previous novels, which are contemporary fiction, this novel kind of surprises in that it is nothing like anything else that I have produced up until now. But this was a story that I really wanted to tell, because the US invasion of Mexico has been erased from history. Here in the US, we grew up not really learning about it in schools. I didn't learn about it in my K through 12 classrooms until I got to my undergrad, when I took a history of Mexico class. And I thought how interesting that I had to take a history of Mexico class to learn about a war that helped the United States double in size. I mean, that's a pretty big defining moment for this country. And yet we erased it because we don't want to shed light on the fact that the US invaded Mexico, that Mexico was a victim of US imperialism and aggression, much like Ukraine is with the Russian invasion. So this was my desire to tell this story. And there are a lot of battles in the novel, because there were a lot of battles during these 2 years that took place. And my protagonists, John Riley and Jimena, are at the forefront of the war. They're in the front lines of the war. And so they, they participated in several of the battles that took place. And I didn't want to shy away from writing about it, because I didn't want this war to be a simple backdrop to the love story. I feel that it has been forgotten for so long that to not write about it would be a disservice to the war. And so, as much as I wanted, and my editor wanted me to write more love, more love, more love, I ended up writing more battles, more battles, more battles. And the pandemic actually helped me write these battle scenes, because when the pandemic happened, as you all know, we were all experiencing a lot of anxiety, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of stress, a lot of worry about the future. And this is exactly how my characters were feeling. And so I mined my own emotions that the pandemic was bringing out in me to write these battle scenes. And it really helped me to be able to put myself in this place where my characters were trying to stay alive through a moment that was really devastating, where there was a lot of death and where the future was uncertain. They didn't know if they were going to survive the next day,
Right.
you know, either the
Right.
battles or the brutal retreats. And so I used a lot of what I was feeling to write the novel, and it really helped my mental health because
Yeah.
I was able to then throw all of this stuff I was feeling into the book.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. Yeah, so I could totally see that, because you're right. It was a very, stressful time, and you don't know what's going to happen next.
Mhm.
And yeah, it's also interesting, that the history, because as I'm reading it, I do remember like some in high school hearing a little bit about the Mexican-American War, but I didn't remember, or I never learned, I don't know, that the United States actually, I'm reading, I'm like asking my husband, because he's a history buff, we were in Mexico, like the United States actually went to the Capitol? I was shocked. I'm like, well, I don't remember reading this anywhere. So yeah. So
Yeah, I
it's
mean,
very,
when the US occupied Mexico City in 1847, they were there for almost a year, and that was the first time the United States occupied a foreign capital.
wow. And I never knew that. So that was really interesting. And so did you learn that in that history class that you took, or did you have to do a
No,
lot of research to write the
I
book?
no, I did a lot of research. I read about 100 books,
Wow.
a lot of history books, but also a lot of diaries, like soldier diaries,
Yeah.
letters that they wrote home. Yeah.
Wow.
And some novels too, like war
Yeah.
novels
Yeah.
to kind of get an idea of how
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
looks like.
Well, it was awesome. I really enjoyed it. I learned a lot, and you're right. I've read all your other books, and I was like, wow, wow. I can't, not that I can't believe she wrote it, but it's like, well, it's so different, right? What about the Irish accent? So, I had a bunch of questions about that. It's like, how did you did that so well? It's like, did you go to Ireland? Do you have Irish ancestors in your family? Did you have
No.
Irish people read it? Because you captured it
Yeah.
perfect.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, well, I didn't get to go to Ireland until after I was done with the book because of the pandemic. I wasn't able to travel while I was writing it. And so what I did was I read a lot of 19th century Irish literature, especially about the Irish peasantry. And I really wanted to capture, because a lot of my characters, I mean, John Riley was an educated man. He knew how to read and write, but a lot of his men were landless Catholic peasants in Ireland who did not get an education. And so they were illiterate. And so I really wanted to capture their voice and
Mhm.
capture his voice. And so I read a lot of Irish literature of the time, and I made lists of like vocabulary words that they use in Irish English versus American English, and then paying very careful attention to the syntax and the diction
Yeah.
also. Um,
Wow.
and I reached out to the university in Galway. I emailed the head of the history department, and I told them that about my novel, and I said I would really love to find an Irish historian who's an expert on this to take a look at my manuscript and and read it. So I found an Irish historian who he read the manuscript, and he was very impressed with what I had done. And
Yeah.
then and then he offered corrections, and he also helped me add the Irish Gaelic in there too.
Oh,
and
okay.
then and then we would talk about history, like, because when Riley goes into Mexico, I really wanted him to constantly be comparing and contrasting, the Irish culture and the Mexican culture, and then also Irish history, or the Irish landscape and the Mexican landscape. And so I talked a lot with this historian about that, and so that's how I was able to also make
Yeah.
sure that I was doing a good job with it.
Yeah, wow. Well, it was really good. It was, I mean, it was, I was kept reading, like, how does she know this? You know, how can she reproduce this language so well? So it seems like it would have taken you a long time. How long did it take you to write the book?
7 years on and off.
Wow.
I
That is
mean,
a long time.
I think it would have been a little bit less, but I had to put it away twice.
Yeah.
Because I put it away once when I did the adaptation, the young readers adaptation for The Distance Between Us.
Hmm.
So I put it away then, and I worked on that book, and then it came out, and then I put it again a second time to write A Dream Called Home.
Okay.
So yeah.
So you wrote other books in between.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so something else that I really liked was that you showed the really complicated history. So the complicated history between like the capital and the northern provinces, and between Mexico and Texas, and between, of course, the United States and Mexico. And, you know, a lot of it, I was making comparisons to modern times. So I'm wondering what you think about how, you know, this complicated history has evolved and continued, I guess, into the present time.
Yeah, well, I think it has become manipulated and distorted, you know, and that's why I really wanted to write about it as a way
Yeah.
to offer a corrective history.
Mm-hmm.
And especially like that's why I also touch on the Texas Rebellion and what happened at the Alamo, because
Yeah.
even the way it's taught in Texas, it's this romanticized
Mm-hmm.
Anglo-sized version of what happened at the Alamo, where the Anglos were the victims and Santana was a villain, you know. And I wanted to offer a different perspective that kind of explores the gray areas.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I really was very intentional about was that I wasn't just being critical of the United States and questioning the choices that the US government made, but I was also being very critical of Mexico. You know,
Yeah.
I did not want to write a romanticized story about Mexico and oh, poor little Mexico, we were the victims, you know.
Yeah.
I wanted to explore the gray areas in that yes, we were the victims of US imperialism, but there's a culpability that we have to own up to.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I reveal how the Mexican government was at fault, the Mexican, you know, generals were always bickering, how the civilians themselves helped the US Army get as far as Mexico City, and all of these things, right?
Yeah.
Because to me, that was a more honest portrayal of the history
Yeah.
by showing that complexity and the contradictions.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I love that. I thought it was so good because, yeah, it wasn't, you know, there was no bias. It was just, like you said, you know, all the different complexities between all the different people. And Santa Anna was a villain for a bit. I'm like, oh my God, I didn't know this about this guy. This
But
guy was terrible.
he's a charismatic villain.
Yeah, but he's, oh my gosh.
He has his nice moments.
All right, so we've covered the war, and so I love, you know, obviously the love story, and so it is, you know, it is that like you said, you didn't want it to be overwhelmed, the actual war and the battle and the history around it, but it's a great love story. And do you think, and so everything, I don't want to spoil the end, so they'll have to read the end to find out what happens, but do you think like in real life, there were people like that, right? Do you think that they would have been able to survive this war, and that their love would have, you know, survived all this, because they went through so much?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think I feel that I'm an example of that, like of where I've gone through many difficult moments in my life, but I've survived through it, and I've managed to be in really good relationship and find a great man to be with and spend my
Yeah.
life with. So
Yeah.
that's kind of what I gave John and Jimena, was this love between them, but it's not an easy love. They have to really fight for it. And obviously the war scars them, it
Yeah.
scars them, and and then at least like with Jimena, like you get to understand that they're always going to deal with the aftermath of the war and how it has traumatized them. But the ultimate glory is
Mhm.
them being able to stay together and to fight for their love.
Yeah. 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 And I loved Jimena because she was such a strong woman, but she was also so gentle, with him, and she understood what he had been going through and how much he suffered. So yeah, she was a great heroine.
Mm.
So these two characters, you talk about it. So I read, the whole thing, even your comments at the end. But do you want to tell us like what inspired these two? You said John was a real person, but Jimena was not. So what inspired you to create these two characters?
Yeah, so John Riley is a real historical figure, and I first heard about him in 2013 when I was promoting A Distance Between Us. Somebody asked me if I had ever heard of the St. Patrick's Battalion, and I hadn't. So then they told me, oh, it was a unit in the Mexican army composed of deserters from the US Army, and most of them were Irish, and its leader was John Riley. So I became very fascinated by the fact that there was a unit in the Mexican army of deserters from the US Army. And then I started researching John Riley, and I just fell in love with him. It's like, oh, I want to explore more. I want to know why he did it. Like, why did he desert? Why did he switch sides? Why did he want to help Mexico? Why did he stay in the war even after he knew Mexico was losing? Like I had all these questions. And so my way of getting to know him was to write about him.
Mhm.
And then I discovered Jimena when I was researching the war. I found a poem by John Greenleaf Whittier called The Angels of Buena Vista. And at the time, I lived in Whittier, California. So that's what kind of stuck out to me, that I wasn't really familiar with his work. And I worked in Whittier, which is named after him. And I read the poem. And what surprised me was that it was a very pro-Mexican poem, and he wrote it in 1847 when the US was at war with Mexico. And most of the writing that was coming out of this country was very anti-Mexican. And
Yeah.
yet here's Whittier writing a poem that celebrates the courage of Mexican soldaderas.
Mhm.
And they're out in the battlefield tending to the wounded. And his character in the poem is this woman named Jimena. And when I read the poem, I started to wonder, who's Jimena? What is she doing there? How did she end up in the battlefield? What's her story? Where did she come from? Who did she lose in this war? So, the wheels just started turning. And I said, okay, I think I found my female character here. And then I came across a rumor that the real John Riley had fallen in love with the Mexican widow. And some people think that he stayed in Mexico and married this widow after the war. So then that's when the love story was born for me.
Oh, okay. Okay. Very good. Very good. Okay. So I have a question from the Denver network. So I haven't seen this movie, but they want to know if you were inspired by the movie One Man's Hero. Have you
Oh,
seen that?
no. Well, I hate that movie.
I haven't seen it. So.
It's terrible. So in a way, you could say it inspired me because I said, I'm going to do it better and I'm going to be more accurate with the history. That movie took a lot of liberties with the history,
Okay. Okay.
beginning
Yeah.
with having them desert on horses, where in fact John Riley deserted by throwing himself into the Rio Grande and swimming south. And
Yeah.
to me, that was the first thing I hated about the movie, because the image of of the Rio Grande, when we think of it, it's always from south to north, right? We have all these immigrants coming south to north, and they throw themselves into the Rio Grande, cross to this side. But to me, I found it so fascinating that at this point in history, it was a north to south thing, a north to south migration journey. Even the Black slaves that the officers had brought with them were throwing themselves into the Rio Grande and swimming south to find a better life in Mexico, because Mexico had abolished slavery. And
Right.
as soon as they crossed the Rio Grande, they were free. So that image, I thought it was so beautiful, and that movie just ruined it. So I didn't like it.
You didn't like it, didn't? Okay. Okay, another thing, inspiration. I was trying to find it just a few minutes ago, but I read somewhere, one of your reviews, that compared this writing to Victor Villaseñor's writing. And I'm wondering if you have been inspired by his writing, or if not, then what other authors have inspired, especially a historical novel.
Mhm. Well, I mean, I really love Reign of Gold,
Mhm.
and I read it a long time ago, and I loved the scope of it. You know, this big
Yes.
epic family story, and I love the beautiful language. So, I mean, you could say that I was influenced, but I haven't read that book in a really long time, so I wasn't necessarily like actively like or consciously thinking about it as I was
Right.
writing the novel. Um, I also read The Hummingbird's Daughter a long time ago, you know, by Luis Urrea, which is another beautiful historical novel that's very large in scope as well. And Isabel Allende, like she writes a lot of historical fiction. So I read like Along Peril of the Sea. I read Cold Mountain. I read All the Light We Cannot See. Like oh, and The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna. Like I was reading a lot of war stories or like
Mhm.
big historical epics. So those were some of the books that I was reading.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think we're all inspired by the past, right? The books that we've read, and they leave little impressions on us when we're writing our own books. Okay. Let's see. How are we doing on time?
One more question.
One more question. Okay. Let's see. Which one did I leave out? I might have gotten all of them. Let me see. Because she answered so much things that I was going to ask. Yeah, I think I have. So, well, no. What did I do with the other ones? Okay, so you have the new anthology that is out now, right? Or is it
Mhm.
coming out? It's right
Yeah,
now.
it came out earlier this month.
Okay, so it's called Somewhere We Are Human, and Las Comadres has recommended it for part of their summer reading list. So can you tell us a little bit about that anthology and some of the writers who contributed stories?
Mhm. Yeah, so every time I submitted the novel to my editor, I would switch to the anthology, because so I was juggling the two books at the same time. But the anthology was born out of me and my co-editor. We wanted to put together a collection of undocumented stories
Mm,
written by and about undocumented immigrants. And my co-editor and I are both formerly undocumented. And so we wanted this project to be completely, you know, created by undocumented Americans.
mm,
And so we turned in a proposal to HarperCollins, and they were very interested in an anthology like this. So we got the green light, and we put out a call for submissions. So we ended up with 41 voices in the anthology, and it's a collection of essays personal essays and poems, and then there are a few pieces of art as well. So there's a visual component there. And it was such an incredible journey being able to gather these pieces and then help our contributors really like polish each one. You know, we took them through several revisions, and then just being able to see how each piece spoke with one another and what it said about the undocumented immigrant experience. And what I love about the essay, I mean, the anthology, is that it's not just a Latino collection. It is an anthology that features contributors from over 20 countries, including like Korea, Nigeria, Bangladesh, Brazil, the Philippines, you know, so we wanted to have a diverse voices that represent that diverse voices in our immigrant community.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. I'm definitely going to share that with the university where I'm teaching, because I know, you know, we have our undocumented student center and all of that. And I think that this would be something really great. I know we were trying to get like even the students to write, but they're very shy, you know, about writing about their experience. So something like this could really, really inspire them. Okay, so anything else that you're working on, and other novels or stories that we can expect to see soon?
I am gonna start working on my next book next month. I'm gonna be writing a collection of essays where I combine both like personal experiences, but also some craft advice. Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. Awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you very much for sharing. It was great to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too.
Thank you very much, Reyna. Thank you, Julia. Our second interview is with author Cleyvis Natera. She was born in the Dominican Republic and raised in New York City. She has received honors from PEN America, Bread Loaf Writers Conference, Virginia Center for the Creative Arts, and Voices of Our Nation's Arts Foundation. Cleyvis teaches creative writing to undergraduate students at Fordham University and graduate students at the Winters Foundry MFA program at St. John's College in Brooklyn. Interviewing Cleyvis will be Comadre Cecilia Chavez. She is currently the Division Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for the Texas Association of School Boards. Prior to this 2-year role, she owned and ran her DEI consulting business for 23 years. Comadre Cecilia, take it away.
Thank you. And I'm going to ask everybody to be cognizant of the chat. So if you have something, a question, or you'd like to make a comment, please enter it in there. But I think if you've read the book, please enter one word that describes your reaction to this book. I'd love to see all these words, and they will help me with the interview. And I think Cleyvis will be happy to see them as well. So I want to warmly welcome Cleyvis. You wrote a beautiful book, a wonderful story. One of the first things I noticed was that you cited way at the back of the book as I was reading both the front and back cover, that it took you 15 years to write this. So tell us why it took 15 years and what that journey was like.
Great. Well, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, welcome everyone. First, I wanted to say thank you to Reyna because I'm such a fan. Reyna knows I'm like fangirling every time I see her. I love this book, and any of you that haven't read A Ballad of Love and Glory, I strongly recommend you read it because I think it's just gorgeous and it's so heartbreaking and heart empowering. I just really think it's a wonderful book. So thank you, Reyna. I always get inspired by Reyna and all her projects. She's so she has so much range. But thank you all for coming. I'm so excited to be here with all of you. Yeah, 15 years is a really long time to work on one book. And so, you know, I think like Reyna was saying before, you know, about the different things that happen in our lives as writers. I was, reeling from heartbreak from my first book, because I wrote a thesis project when I was at NYU, got an agent, and we got very close to selling the book. And my editor wasn't able to get support. Back then, I'm told everything has changed, but back then you had to get a lot of support internally. And that editor wasn't able to get the support. And to be fair, I just don't think that book was so strong. But at that point, I decided, as we were attempting to get that book sold, that I would just focus on this other fun project and to take my mind off of it. And little did I know it would be 15 years before I would, get this book out into the world. But, like part of what happened during that time is that I was working a full-time corporate job. I did the entire time I went to graduate school. I got married. I have two beautiful kids, a 9-year-old and a 7-year-old. So I was busy being a mom. And to be honest with you, I also stopped writing. I mean, there were several times when I gave up on this project altogether. I just thought it was very difficult to do what I wanted to do, and I didn't know how to do it. So just about 4 years ago, I took a look around my life, and I was like, I'm not doing what I want to do. I don't feel that I am being true to myself as both a writer and a mother and a human, because I had denied a big part of who I am, which is to be a writer. And I came full throttle back, and I started going back to school to learn how to do some of the more difficult things that I was attempting to do with this book. And so I'm just very happy that halfway through the last 4 years, I got an agent and we sold the book, and now the book is in your hands. So it's a happy ending.
That's wonderful. So what corporation were you employed with? I'm just curious how that might have also blended into your book. And
actually, I'm waiting for like my people to like read it from my job. I don't think any of them have, because there are quite a bit of inside jokes in here. I worked in the insurance industry, and I did, my professional background was in project management. So I ran a lot of teams. I was a second level leader, a third level leader. I was an executive at one point. So I did operational support, and I did project management teams. And my last 5 years, I was running a claim team where we did all kinds of professional, professional liability for lawyers and accountants and doctors and nurses. And I had a very small team that did medical, workers' comp. So I had a huge team. I had 40 people that worked for me. 5 of the women, I had an all women leadership team. 5 of the women were lawyers. And so, one of the things that people are always asking me is like, how do you know so much about the law? Like how this sounds like, you're a lawyer yourself. But, I worked for lawyers my entire time at CNA Insurance. And my last 5 years, I actually managed and led a team of five lawyers. And so.
Well, that was going to be my next question. So you asked it for me. So tell us a little bit about your process in writing this book and the process you might take in a future book.
Yeah. So, let me just start out first by saying that, Neruda on the Park is a story about a community, and it's a story about a mother and daughter that find themselves on very different sides of gentrification. The daughter is, Ivy League educated, in her late 20s, and she kind of takes it as a matter of course when this building is torn down in her community. She thinks, this is what has happened all around New York City, and some of it is going to be good and some of it is not going to be so good. Her mother, on the other hand, is very worried, and she's very scared about what this is going to mean for her community. And so she very quickly comes up with this plan, a scheme of escalating events to try to stop this construction of this luxury building, because she knows that it means that the community is going to be pushed out of their homes, if not in the immediate present, in the future. And so, I was very interested in looking at, first of all, this idea of home, and like both my protagonists, a mother and daughter, are both immigrant women. The daughter arrived in the United States when she was 9 years old, and the mother, her mother was older, of course. But I really wanted to like push against this idea that I think there's like a narrative in this country around, immigrants and how, you know, most immigrants just come here to make a little cash and then everybody's yearning to go back home and build a home. And, you know, that's the story of Luz's father, Eusebia's husband. But, you know, Luz and Eusebia consider Northrop Park, this fictional town in New York City, their home. They're not trying to go anywhere, you know, and or they are rather New York City. I mean, Luz has some ideas about where she'd rather live. That's not in this community. So I was really interested in looking at, you know, just pushing against this narrative that says immigrants are temporary people, that we're only coming here for a short bit. I wanted to write strong characters who claim the United States as home, who have earned the right to be in this country, who don't need to be grateful or act like we've overstayed our welcome, but that, you know, we've all earned our spot in this land through our labor and through, you know, all the sacrifices we've done to get here to begin with.
Thank you. As I was reading it, I was thinking, oh my gosh, it's another fairy tale. You know, she goes to Harvard, she becomes an attorney, she meets a multimillionaire, maybe billionaire, I forgot how much money he had, but probably more like billionaire, and lives happily ever after. And then the story just shifts on you all of a sudden, and you're just glued to the book. So I loved how you did that. You kind of set us up for that, you know. Thank you.
So I'm glad you noticed that. Thank you for that.
It kind of tricked us, but it kept us reading and glued to the book. Another question I want to ask is, you weaved a lot of diversity throughout your book, and being that I'm in that field, I found that really refreshing, because so many authors aren't quite as experienced or up to date with diversity, and so much is changing. You were able to touch on the LGBTQ+ community. You were able to touch on socioeconomics through this book, just, you know, examining, you know, the wealth that different people have or don't have. Race came up, multicultural came up. I think being who you are as a, you know, as both an Afro-Latina, but also a woman in this country, you know, has so many opportunities to just get detracted from the judgments that people will have about you. And sometimes I call that living in the gray space. You don't quite fit in this group, you don't quite fit in that group, so you're kind of in, and I understand that because I'm the güerita. So people will often assume I'm not Mexican, and you know, and then Mexican people will assume I'm not Mexican. White people will assume I'm not Mexican. So I'm constantly having to, you know, hold my ground on that and let them know this is who I am and this is my culture. And I'm sure you face that a lot in your journey, and you weaved it through the book, social media. And the one thing that really, really caught my attention, and right now is so needed in our country, is mental health. So tell us a little bit about the research you did on that, and tell us about your reasoning for really weaving that piece into your book.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start with the last part of it, with the mental health, because, you know, I really think that the United States is going through a mental health crisis. I think we see it manifesting in violence, in extreme violence. I think we see it, you know, and I think it's interesting the way that we, as a population, are so often pitted against each other. And I mean, you know, I'm one of those people, one of those writers who's really fascinated by news headlines. And so, you know, part of what I was really interested in looking at, and I have to tell you, it's one of those things where, you know, when we talk about, Comadre Cecilia, when we think about womanhood, and I think what womanhood forces us to do is that you cannot just sit idly by, right? Like, we are responsible for all of our communities, you know? When you think about, like, any time that anything happens to a child, the first question is not, where's the dad? Right? The first question is always, where was the mother when something happened, you know? So I think about the weight that we have to carry as women. And I wanted to use that as like the propulsive mechanism for the way that Eusebia, who is this, has never heard a fly. I mean, she babysits these 5-year-olds from time to time. Even they know she's a joke when she threatens to hit them if they don't stop acting out. Like, they're like, she would never hurt anybody. And this is the person that like we see become kind of monstrous as like her mental health unravels. And I thought, it makes for great fiction to see someone like that continuously surprises you with the kind of choices they make, but also who, like, you know, we come to understand there's so much trauma within her own history, and like dealing with the threat of displacement and of losing her home, like really triggers within her this traumatic reaction. And, you know, when I was in undergraduate school, I studied psychology, and I'm really fascinated by the way that human beings are so often contradictions. Like, we say we want one thing, but then we'll do like the opposite thing, you know? And so I think that's a wonderful way to craft characters. And so for me, I knew I was taking a big bite. And, you know, some of the advice I got, I mean, you're asking before about like, how do you go about, you know, researching, and how do you kind of weave it all together? And, you know, I was thinking about like our immigrant communities and how, you know, there isn't a lot of room to celebrate the struggles that we go through. I mean, what Reyna was talking about before, I think happens to us all the time. All of our communities, all of our accomplishments are erased. I think we are required, regardless of where you come from and the color of your skin. I mean, the American experiment requires us to surrender culture, to surrender language in favor of assimilation. And I also think that's violent. And so I wanted to think about, you know, this building and gentrification as this force that is really all the other violences that the characters go through. You know, when you think about, you know, Luz and what she has to put up with in a corporate environment and the hostility that she has to deal with, you know, growing up and coming up in predominantly white environments. I mean, that's what I had to do. And I was very successful at it. I was very good at it, but it was at a cost to my mental health. So, you know, I'm so grateful for you being such a close reader, because I feel like, you know, part of the reason why this book is so ambitious, and some people feel like, oh my God, this book is like tentacles in all the ways, but I think the seed, the heart of the book is the same kind of thing. And it's like this idea of like what we have to surrender and what it costs us to surrender.
And I think you place Luz at the core of womanhood, and you talk about her intelligence, her ability to achieve these degrees, her ability to take care of all her community's legal issues, and her going into like the Vadio scholar, and all of a sudden she is the Vadio Vata, you know, she can just, you know, shift those personalities in 2 sentences. She's in either one world or the other. And also woman's body image, and how we're trying so hard to meet the standard that men have put out there for us. And you really examine that, you know, with the woman going and getting from head to toe, everything upgraded, you know, to a newer model. So her husband won't look at the younger, gorgeous women, and then she gets that feminine piece done, and they can no longer have sex. So I thought that was hilarious. I thought after all that for nothing. So I just loved the way you weaved everything, her relationship with friends, her relationship with her mother, her relationship with money, her relationship with this man that she meets. So what caused you to make her so multi-dimensional in so many aspects?
Well, for me, I mean, there's an upside to writing a book over 15 years and a downside. And I would say the upside is that I grew up, you know, when I started writing this book was a first person narrative about this young girl that comes home from college and is having a lot of sex, and is like trying to figure out how to navigate the workplace. And her mom is like running around the neighborhood doing all these crazy things, you know, and she's just trying to figure out like how to find herself. So it was a coming of age story. But I think as I grew older, and I think especially in the context of motherhood, it really made me appreciate and feel so tender toward my younger self, because I had been so hard on myself. Anytime that I wasn't respected, or, you know, my ideas were usurped at work, or I wasn't given credit, or, you know, I was passed over. I just felt like it was because I wasn't smart enough or good enough, or I hadn't done what I needed to do. And you know what happens, you know, once you turn that corner around 40, is that you see the world for what it is, right? You're like, oh no, I was actually amazing, you know? And it was the environment around me that was hostile to me. And, you know, and I think that having that kind of 2020 vision, you know, it's been such a gift that I didn't give up on this book. Or I should say I did give up on the book, but coming back to it and fighting for the story, because, you know, for me, I wanted Luz to be really multidimensional. And, you know, a key aspect of that was that I didn't want this to feel like a lesson. I didn't want this to feel like something you read to learn about the Afro-Latino diaspora. You know, like I wanted this book to be a delicious, sexy book about really complicated women and everybody that's around them. And that means like really kind people who cause a lot of harm without meaning to. And it meant like culture and food and like all the things that I love. And so that's part of the reason why I really, I mean, especially with Luz, because I wanted her also to be like an example of the ways in which, because of a lot of the sacrifices of our parents, we're able to achieve a certain level of peace that, you know, maybe is not afforded to our mothers. And so I wanted to also like pay a lot of honor to the women in my own family, the women that I think didn't get a chance to have a life where they could really enjoy their bodies, you know, or enjoy the deliciousness of like being forward sexually and saying, this is what I want and you're going to give it to me. You know, like I just wanted her to be like a full person.
Yes, you know, they've got this term in my world called intersectionality, and it's being used all the time nowadays. But if I could just offer people this book and say, you want to learn about intersectionality, just take Luz. And she's more than a woman. She's more than her culture. She's more than her education. She's more than her race. She's more than her socioeconomics. I mean, all of it is just within her. And I just loved how you demonstrated what that word intersectionality really means, because we're so quick to judge people based on their race or their gender or their whatever. And we're not one-dimensional, we're multi-dimensional, every single one of us, every single human being. So you were just a genius at doing that with this book. I think one of the things, and that we're almost running out of time, but what was your relationship like with your mother, and how did you maybe connect that in this book, or possibly ask for forgiveness for anything, or be grateful for anything in your relationship with your mom?
Yeah, I mean, that's such a charged question. I'm glad you left it for the end. Oops, no time. Well, you know, I mean, it's difficult. It's difficult to say that, you know, I think my mother and I today have a really beautifully close-knit relationship, but we went through a lot of really difficult times. I mean, my mother, and it was like the circumstances of life, but my mother ended up, you know, marrying a man who was, you know, physically abusive and sexually abusive to many people in my home. And growing up, I grew up in a home where home didn't always feel safe. And you know, I thought a lot about like, how do we address, you know, that violence? How do we address that sadness that we all were carrying as we were growing up? But more importantly, like, how do we confront the silences? Because for a very long time, I mean, I'm fortunate in a way that I was one of the people that, you know, got to bear witness. I did not suffer the worst of the abuse in my home. And in some ways, I always carried a lot of guilt about that. So when I came back from college, and I was the first one who went to therapy, and I just remember, like, you know, I studied psychology in large part because I felt like I was going to come be the savior and get everybody to like be healthy, you know, but it's been like a very difficult thing to do, you know. And I think for me and my sisters, you know, some of whom really suffered terrible abuse, you know, I went away. I mean, I was one of those people that felt like college was going to be my ticket out. And it was for me. Like, I went away when I was 18, and I got to to leave a lot of the ugliness that I was growing up with. And you know, what's really interesting is that, you know, one of the projects that I'm working on, one of the reasons why I love Reyna so much is because Reyna does the nonfiction and the fiction. I've been working on a memoir for a very long time. And I really started it right around the time when I came back. And I asked my family for permission. And my mom was the first person who said, I really want you to write the truth. You know, and I've started writing it. Some of it I've written it as fiction. A lot of it I have several essays I've written, and it's very slow going because it's very painful. But you know, in a way, I think stories and language and having this kind of future where all the silences get to be exposed through a book has afforded me and my family a place to heal. And it's very slow work, so I don't want to romanticize that either. But I think, you know, like I was with my mom earlier today, you know, we went to visit my sister who got surgery, and my mom is just like an incredible woman. I mean, the things she herself had to survive, you know, so I think the older I get, the more grateful I am for her, even though there were some decisions she made that were very painful decisions for us as children.
Well, I'm personally grateful that I had the honor and the pleasure to interview you. And I just want to say that when you share that kind of pain, it wasn't only therapeutic, and it isn't only therapeutic for your family, but it'll be for millions of women that read this book that can come, you know, totally relate and have been through similar situations and just haven't found their voice. So that is very therapeutic and healing for many. So I applaud you and thank you so much, because it takes a lot to put yourself out there like that. It takes courage, and you are a warrior. So thank you.
Guerreras. Thank you.
Nora?
Wow. I'm just sitting here stunned, feeling so much emotion from both of these writers and the stories that you all have written. Wow. Thank you so much. Thank you, Reyna Grande. Thank you, Cleyvis Natera. And thank you to your publishers, Washington Square Press and Ballantine Books, and their generous donation of books to our early registrants. Would also like to acknowledge Reyna's gift of bookmarks and a signed stick-on bookplate for your copy of her book. The first 50 of you should have received this gift in the mail. And if you haven't, you should be receiving it shortly. I hand wrote all of those, okay? And put them in the mail, lick the stamps, lick the bag. I had fun, what can I tell you? Thank you also to our interviewers, Comadres Julia and Laura, Laura, Cecilia, Liliana, however many names you have, Comadre. And we want to thank our audience for taking the time to join us tonight. And to those that submitted questions, we'd like to thank all our volunteers, without whom this book club and all the associated work would not happen. Truly, mil gracias from the bottom of our heart. And please remember to support our authors by writing a review of their books on sites like Amazon, Goodreads, Barnes & Noble, etc. These reviews, they carry weight with the publishers. They mean a lot to other readers as well. Buy books to support our authors. And if your library doesn't have a book you want to read, ask them to order it. And please attend your virtual local book club meetings and bring a friend or two. Remember, our book club is open to men and women, Latinos and non-Latinos. All are welcome. Our July books are A Woman of Endurance by Dalma Llanos Figueroa and The Town of Babylon by Alejandro Varela. Again, thank you all for your continued support of our book club and of Latino literature. And please join us in celebrating our quinceañero throughout the year by buying books and supporting Latino authors. Good night, and always read Latino literature. Oh, and I want to say, so many of you, we've seen your names, and today we got a chance to see you. Show us you. Don't stop your video. Let us see you, because I see your name so often and I don't get to see your beautiful faces. Please show us, say hello, wave to all of you. It's been wonderful, and I can't wait till next month. Comadre Maria, you are amazing. Thank you so much for all you do. Comadre Tess, Comadre Dora, comadre from Denver. Yes, how come I forgot her name?
Karen.
Karen, comadre Karen, whose computer is not working really well. That's why she's not online right now. But all of you, have a wonderful evening.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.